What's gaming, gamers? Today, I've got a video for you using the Titan Exotic Arms Armor Doomfang Pauldron and the Exotic Void Submachine Gun, the Manticore. I know most of you will be cringing at the mere mention of the Manticore, but I assure you, in content up to and including the Legend difficulty, Manticore, when paired with this build, is a respectable option. The gameplay you're seeing in the background is this build in the Lightfall campaign replayed on the Legend difficulty. But before I get into the build itself, I'd like to shout out our clan, the Tyrant Seraphs. If you're looking for people to play any content in Destiny with, ranging from ritual playlist and seasonal activities, all the way to raids and Grandmaster strikes, feel free to join the Discord server. We welcome anyone, no matter how new or seasoned you are, and all of us will teach encounters if you don't know something. If you're interested, hop into the Discord server and play some Destiny with us. The link is in the description. Additionally, if you'd like to watch me play games more often, come hang out with me over on Twitch. I usually play whatever game I feel like over there, so if that interests you, the link for that is also in the description. Anyways, back to the video. The first thing I'll do is describe to you what the Doomfang Pauldron Exotic Arms Armor does, in case you're not aware. Doomfang Pauldron has the exotic perk Horns of Doom, which cause rapid void kills to grant you stacks of the Void Weapon Surge buff for 11 seconds. Continuing to get void kills will increase the strength of the Void Surge up to 4 stacks. Void kills while at 4 stacks of the Void Surge buff refresh its timer. Additionally, Void melee kills instantly grant you 20% of your super's energy, as well as granting you all 4 stacks of the Void Surge buff, which can then be chained by getting kills with your Void weapons or other abilities. Lastly, Horns of Doom causes your Sentinel Shield's shield throw ability to grant you 10% super energy, which simply extends the duration of your super while you're in it. As you can see, Doomfang Pauldron is a fantastic neutral game exotic for Void Titans, as well as being a super enhancing exotic if you're running the Sentinel Shield. As I haven't mentioned it yet, 4 stacks of the Void Surge buff grants your Void weapons an outgoing 25% damage boost, which is significant. Now that you know what Doomfang Pauldron does, I can get into the rest of the build, starting with the subclass setup. I'll first put everything on screen as a prescriptive setup, and then I'll get into more detail about the subclass's setup, describing what each subclass element does, why I've chosen it, as well as any alternative options should there be any. For the prescriptive setup, run the Sentinel Shield Super, the Rally Barricade, whichever jump you prefer, the Shield Bash Melee, the Vortex Grenade, the Controlled Demolition aspect, the Offensive Bulwark aspect, Echo of Cessation, Echo of Instability, Echo of Provision, and Echo of Starvation. To describe the subclass's setup, firstly, the Super. Sentinel Shield is a roaming super, and it grants a significant 90% damage resistance to all incoming damage. While in the super, you can use your primary attack to perform a melee combo, damaging enemies hit by the combo. If you use your grenade ability, you'll perform a shield throw, which will damage enemies hit by the shield, as well as ricocheting off of enemies and surfaces towards other enemies. Lastly, you can guard with the super, which will create an impenetrable barrier through which your allies can shoot. Allies shooting through the shield will be granted 40% increased damage, as well as an increase to their weapons handling and reload speed stats. Due to the Doomfang Pauldron exotic armor, hitting enemies with the shield throw ability will refund you 10% of your super's energy while the super is active, extending its duration. Onto the barricade, you can really use whichever one you want. I choose to run the Rally Barricade as its cooldown is shorter, meaning I can use it for ability regeneration purposes more often. I feel as though this build has enough damage resistance tools to not require the Towering Barricade's protection, but you can run it if you feel you need it. For the melee ability, the Shield Bash Melee is chosen as it's much easier to get a kill with than the Shield Throw Melee. Shield Bash will allow you to perform a shoulder charge while sprinting. Killing an enemy with the Shield Bash Melee will grant you a 45 health overshield. Shield Bash also suppresses the target hit by the melee, which means it can be used as a suppress utility if you need it. Onto the grenade, the Vortex Grenade is chosen as I believe it to be the best Void Grenade. The Vortex Grenade will create an area of effect that sucks enemies into it upon landing, which will damage enemies over time so long as they're inside the grenade's AoE. You can really use any of the Void Grenades if you choose to, but I find the Vortex Grenade to be the best and most consistent of the Void Grenades. Onto the aspects, firstly, Controlled Demolition will cause your Void abilities to apply the Volatile debuff to any enemies damaged by them. Furthermore, Volatile Explosions will apply the Volatile debuff to any enemies damaged by those as well, which can cause a chain reaction of Volatile Explosions. Lastly, Controlled Demolition will grant you 90 health instantly whenever a Volatile Explosion happens near you, which is a great tool for survivability in combination with other damage mitigation and healing utilities. Next, Offensive Bulwark will cause your Void Overshield to grant you additional buffs. These buffs include a 400% increase to your grenade ability's recharge rate, and a 100% increase to your Void Melee's damage. Furthermore, simply having the Offensive Bulwark aspect equipped grants your Sentinel Shield Super a second shield throw ability, which allows you to regenerate even more of your super while using it. For the fragments, firstly, Echo of Cessation. Echo of Cessation will cause enemies killed by your finishers to explode in a volatile explosion, which will apply volatile to enemies nearby to the one finished. Most importantly, however, killing volatile enemies will summon a Void Breach, which, upon collection, will grant you class ability energy. Void Breaches incur a 5-second cooldown between creations, which means you can't create a Void Breach more than once every 5 seconds. Next, Echo of Instability will cause Grenade Final Blows to grant your Void Weapons the Volatile Rounds buff for 11 seconds. While Volatile Rounds is active, damage caused by your Void Weapons will apply the Volatile debuff to enemies, which will proc Controlled Demolition to heal you, as well as Echo of Cessation to summon Void Breaches. This is helpful, as it will allow you to create Void Breaches more often, as well as cause Volatile Explosions more often, which will heal you. The creation and collection of Void Breaches will help this build's ability loop, as well as survivability, using the Echo of Starvation fragment that I'll talk about shortly. Echo of Instability increases your strength stat by 10 points, but as you'll see shortly, this doesn't matter. The third fragment is Echo of Provision. Echo of Provision will grant you a small amount of melee energy every time the Vortex Grenade ticks damage onto an enemy, which will help your Shield Bash's uptime a significant amount so long as you're damaging enemies with your grenade. You should be damaging enemies with your grenade often, as killing enemies with it will grant you volatile rounds, which is an important piece of this build's loop. Echo of Provision does lower your strength stat by 10 points, but that's cancelled out by the increase to the strength stat granted by Echo of Instability. Lastly, for fragments to run is Echo of Starvation. Echo of Starvation will cause the collection of Orbs of Power or Void Breaches to grant you the Devour buff for 5 seconds. If you already have Devour when you collect an Orb or a Void Breach, Echo of Starvation will simply increase its duration by 5 seconds. Devour will be incredibly helpful as a survivability utility for this build, as kills obtained while Devour is active will heal you for 100 health, grant grenade energy, and increase the duration of Devour by 5 seconds, up to a maximum buff timer of 10 seconds. Echo of Starvation does lower your recovery stat by 10 points, but with how much this build will be healing and mitigating damage, this 10-point deficit won't matter at all. As for alternative fragments, there are a few options. Firstly, Echo of Persistence will increase the duration of void buffs applied to you by 50%, which increases their uptime significantly. This can be helpful in higher difficulty content if you find your weapons lack the punch to kill enemies fast enough to extend the duration of Devour within its 5-second base duration. On a Titan, Echo of Persistence will lower your resilience stat by 10 points, but this build has plenty of damage mitigation and healing potential, so this loss of resilience is negligible. Next, for alternative fragments, Echo of Remnants will increase the lingering duration of your Vortex Grenade by 50%, allowing it more time to kill higher health enemies. This also increases the total amount of damage it can do to mages and bosses if you throw the grenade at them. Echo of Remnants doesn't increase the burst damage potential of the Vortex Grenade at all, however. It only increases its total damage if the enemy you've thrown the grenade at stands perfectly still within the Vortex Grenade's area of effect for its duration. Lastly, for alternative fragments is Echo of Vigilance. Echo of Vigilance will grant you a Void Overshield for 5 seconds upon killing an enemy while at critical health, which can be a great bailout utility if you find yourself critical without Devour active or your Shield Bash on cooldown. Echo of Vigilance has an intrinsic 8-second cooldown, meaning it can't proc its Overshield more than once every 8 seconds. Echo of Vigilance also lowers your recovery stat by 10 points, but that doesn't matter too much to this build with its damage mitigation and healing potential. If you are to run any of the alternative fragments I've just mentioned, the best fragment to swap out for them is Echo of Provision. Out of the 4 prescriptive fragments I use, Provision is the least impactful and as such should be the first candidate to be swapped out if you want to use any of the alternative fragments I've just mentioned. With the subclass setup now entirely detailed, I can get into the armor setup for this build. Normally, I'd go over the seasonal artifact at this point in the video, but this season's artifact has no mods that help this build out significantly enough for me to dedicate time to explaining them, so I'll skip it and move into the armor's setup. For the armor's setup, I'll start with stat distribution. In the top 3 stat grouping of Mobility, Resilience, and Recovery, spec it to Resilience first, with Recovery second, and Mobility third. Resilience is very important to spec into. Each tier of Resilience grants an additive 3% damage resistance, as well as increasing your total amount of health and shields, making Resilience especially important to have for harder difficulty content. On top of all of that, Resilience is the Titan's class stat. This means the higher your Resilience stat is, the faster your Barricade's base cooldown will be, meaning it will be off cooldown more often. Recovery isn't as important as Resilience, but it is more important than Mobility. Recovery dictates the delay between having taken damage and the start of your health regenerating, as well as the rate at which you regenerate your health. This build has plenty of damage mitigation tools in Void Overshields and the Manticore SMG, as well as having the Devour buff to heal upon getting kills, but recovery is important when those utilities aren't active or available. Mobility is the least important stat for this build. Mobility increases your jump height and walking movement speed, but as this build isn't designed to jump high or walk fast, mobility isn't important. Still, I recommend having at least 30 points in your mobility stat, as that keeps your jump height at its base. Having lower mobility can adversely affect you in jumping sections of activities. For the bottom 3 stat grouping of Discipline, Intellect, and Strength, spec into Strength first, with Discipline second, and ignore Intellect altogether. Strength is the most important stat in the bottom 3 stat grouping for this build, as it dictates the base recharge rate of your melee ability. The Shield Bash melee ability is the strongest utility this build has, and as such, its uptime is important. Having Shield Bash off cooldown more often grants you overshields when getting kills, a significant increase to your super's uptime with the 20% super energy granted upon kill, as well as a suppress utility on enemies who you need to suppress. Discipline is the second most important stat for the bottom 3 stat grouping, as it governs the base recharge rate of your grenade ability. With Devour, your grenade will be off cooldown significantly more often than normal, so you don't have to spec too highly into Discipline, but put a couple points into it just in case you can't get a Devour proc or are moving between encounters to ensure your grenade is off cooldown when you get there. Lastly, Intellect isn't important at all for this build, as the tier of Intellect you have only changes the passive regeneration rate of your super and nothing else. There's no point to spec into Intellect at all, so ignore it altogether and put those stat points into other, more useful stats. My build stats have me at 33 Mobility, 91 Resilience, 70 Recovery, 60 Discipline, 21 Intellect, and 93 Strength. With stat distribution now detailed, I'll get into the armor's mod setup for this build. I'll put everything on screen first as a prescriptive setup if that's what you prefer. Once I've done that, I'll detail everything about the setup, describing what each mod does, why I've chosen it, as well as any alternative options should there be any. On your helmet, run 1 Ashes to Assets mod and 2 Harmonic Siphon mods. On your arms, run 2 Melee Kickstart mods and 1 Momentum Transfer mod. On your chest piece, simply run whichever resistance mods you need for the content you'll be running. On your legs, run 1 Invigoration mod, 1 Recuperation mod, and 1 Stacks on Stacks mod. On your mark, run 2 Outreach mods and 1 Reaper mod. To detail the armor mod setup, firstly, the helmets mods. The Ashes to Assets mod will grant you an increased amount of super energy upon getting kills with your grenade, with the tier of enemy killed dictating the amount of extra super energy gained. Ashes to Assets will increase the utility of your grenade, and as this build will be throwing the grenade often to be granted additional melee ability energy, having extra passive utility is a nice boon for this build. Next, the 2 Harmonic Siphon mods will generate a potent Orb of Power upon getting multi-kills with your Void weapons. This Orb of Power will be useful for the melee kickstart mods in your arms, super energy, health via the recuperation mod in your legs, as well as granting you the Devour buff upon collection. Alternatively, you can run an ammo finder mod for either heavy or special ammo, whichever you find you need more often. As this build takes advantage of the Manticore SMG, which is an exotic primary, ammo finders will be more effective, so you'll have a lot more ammo to work with. Onto the arms mods, the 2 melee kickstart mods will serve to refund your Shield Bash ability a maximum of 34.56% ability energy upon its use, which will help its uptime significantly. You'll only be granted that amount of ability energy when you have 3 stacks of armor charge, but with this build's generation of Orbs of Power and its reliance on collecting them for many purposes, you'll be collecting Orbs of Power frequently, which will mean you'll be at 3 stacks of armor charge most of the time. Next, the Momentum Transfer mod will grant your Shield Bash ability 10.8% ability energy upon dealing damage with your grenade. This only works once per grenade throw, as Momentum Transfer has a 7-second cooldown between activations, but this is a decent boost to your melee ability's uptime despite that cooldown. For your chest pieces mods, simply running whichever resistance mods you need for the content you'll be running will suffice. If you want, you can run 1 charged up mod, which would increase your maximum armor charge stacks to 4. However, this only increases your maximum refunded melee ability energy from 34.56% to 37.17% energy, which isn't significant enough in my opinion to forego the survivability increasing effects of resistance mods. The exact permutation of resistance mods that you run is entirely up to you, and should change when running different activities to account for the different damage types you'll be taking. As for the legs mods, the Invigoration mod will grant your Shield Bash ability 9% energy upon the collection of any Orb of Power with no cooldown. This is a significant amount of energy when factoring in the fact that there's no cooldown, and as such will make both collecting Orbs of Power more lucrative as well as significantly increasing the uptime of your melee ability. Next, the Recuperation mod will grant you 70 health upon the collection of any Orb of Power with no cooldown. This stacks with Echo of Starvation granting Devour upon the collection of any Orb of Power, which means the collection of an Orb of Power will heal you for 170 health instantly, making the collection of Orbs of Power remarkably safer. Lastly, the Stacks on Stacks mod will cause the collection of Orbs of Power to grant you 2 stacks of armor charge instead of just 1. Stacks on Stacks is brought simply to ensure you have 3 stacks of armor charge when you use your melee ability, as the Melee Kickstart mod is the largest single source of granted melee ability energy. Alternatively, you could run an Elemental Charge mod, which will cause every second Void Breach collected to grant you a stack of armor charge. This build will be generating and collecting Void Breaches consistently, so it could be a decent alternative to Stacks on Stacks if you'd prefer it. Lastly, for the Marks mods, the 2 Outreach mods together will grant your Shield Bash ability 6.8% energy upon the use of your Rally Barricade. Finally, the Reaper mod will cause the use of your class ability to grant your weapons the ability to generate an Orb of Power upon killing an enemy for 10 seconds. This only works to generate 1 Orb of Power, but I've already described how useful Orbs of Power can be, and as such, the Reaper mod is very helpful for orb generation. Additionally, as you'll be using your class ability often to grant yourself melee ability energy, this extra Orb of Power will see decent uptime. With the armor setup now detailed, I'll get into some weapon and weapon perk recommendations for use with this build. I'll describe all 3 weapon slots first, and then I'll detail what exactly the Manticore submachine gun does in case you're not aware. For your kinetic slot, running a special weapon in this slot is recommended. Shotguns are my favorite to run, as they provide a remarkable amount of damage up close, which can be helpful if you have higher health enemies you need to take care of. As for perks I recommend using, Pugilist is the main perk I recommend having on your kinetic slot weapon. Pugilist on shotguns grants a significant amount of melee ability energy upon getting kills with it, so if you're going to be getting kills with your special weapon anyways, you might as well have Pugilist on it to get more utility out of the weapon. As for specific shotguns I recommend using, the Swordbreaker Strand Shotgun from the Crota's End Raid with the perk combination of Pugilist and 1-2 Punch, the Imperial Decree Kinetic Shotgun from the Season of Defiance with the perk combination of Pugilist and Swashbuckler, and the Wastelander M5 Kinetic Shotgun from Dares of Eternity with the perk combination of Pugilist and Trench Barrel. For the energy slot, if you don't have or don't want to run the Manticore SMG, running any other Void weapon will work very well with this build. I'm partial to SMGs personally, but pretty much any Void weapon will work with this build. As for specific weapons I both enjoy and recommend using, the Hero's Burden submachine gun from the Iron Banner loot pool, currently out of rotation with the perk combination of Feeding Frenzy and Destabilizing Rounds, the Ross Arago 4 auto rifle from the World Drop weapon pool with the perk combination of Rewind Rounds and Onslaught, and the Optative hand cannon from the Season of the Wish with the perk combination of Repulsor Brace and Golden Tricorn. For the heavy slot, I prefer running a rocket launcher with this build, as rockets deal a significant amount of damage to majors and bosses, and the 25% increased damage granted by Doomfang Pauldron makes rocket launchers even more lucrative. Specific rocket launchers I recommend using with this build are the Braytech Osprey rocket launcher from the Nightfall weapon pool with the perk combination of Field Prep and Frenzy, the Red Herring rocket launcher from the Witch Queen expansion with the perk combination of Field Prep and Frenzy, and the Royal Entry rocket launcher from the Vanguard weapon pool with the perk combination of Impulse Amplifier and Clown Cartridge. Now that I'm done with the weapons for this build, I'll describe what the Manticore SMG does and why it's fantastic for use with this build. The Manticore SMG has the exotic perk Soaring Fang, which causes damage dealt while grounded to charge the weapon's anti-grav repulsors. Then, dealing damage while airborne while there's anti-grav repulsor charge will cause you to hover in the air. By default, the hover lasts for 3 seconds, and dealing damage while the hover is active will increase its duration by 0.3 seconds per hit. Manticore's exotic trait, Swooping Talons, causes damage dealt while airborne to grant the weapon 4% increased damage per hit up to a maximum damage increase of 40%. This damage boost stacks with Doomfang Pauldron's damage boost, but disappears upon touching the ground. Manticore's Catalyst, aptly and creatively named the Manticore Catalyst, makes it such that getting a kill while airborne will grant you a 50% damage resistance to all incoming damage for 5 seconds. Additionally, while the damage resistance buff is active, dealing damage refills 3 bullets to the Manticore's magazine, with a 0.6 second delay between activations of this magazine refill. All of this makes Manticore a fantastic weapon for use with this build, as the increased damage and airborne damage resistance make it a great weapon to clear ads safely and effectively. Now that the entire build has been detailed, I'll go over a few playstyle tips and tricks for you to help you success with this build. Firstly, always use your grenade after having used your melee ability, as the Echo of Provision Fragment is incredibly helpful for your melee ability's uptime. My usual ability loop is melee, class ability, grenade, as once you've gotten a kill with the grenade, Echo of Instability will grant your Manticore volatile rounds. Then, killing any volatile target will create a Void Breach, which will grant class ability energy as well. Devour will keep your grenade ability fully charged often so long as you're getting kills and collecting orbs of power. As for the Manticore, deal damage with it while grounded, and once your anti-grav repulsors are either close to or completely charged, jump in the air and kill an enemy to be granted the 50% damage resistance from the Manticore's Catalyst. If you don't have the Catalyst, I highly recommend completing it, as the Catalyst is a significant source of survivability. When going up against Majors, ensure you have anti-grav repulsor charge, as jumping in the air and damaging them that way will grant you a significant 40% damage boost to them. Alternatively, use your kinetic slot weapon to deal damage to them while grounded. But that's all for this video, thanks for watching. Again, if you'd like to join our clan, the Tyrant Seraphs, the link to the Discord server is in the description. Additionally, if you'd like to watch me stream some games sometime, come hang out with me over on Twitch. The link for that is also in the description. If you have any questions or constructive criticisms, please leave them in the comments. I read all of them and reply to all that I can. Thank you again for watching, and have a great day!